Welcome to tonight's journey into one of the most unsettling cases ever preserved in the history of the American South. Before we begin, I invite you to share in the comments where you are listening from and the exact time of day or night when this narration has reached you. It's always remarkable to see how far and wide these stories travel. The year was 1887. That summer in Texas was a furnace, the heat pressing down on the land like a fever that refused to break. The ranch stretched endlessly, an empire grown from cotton sweat and the weary endurance of African Americans who, though no longer enslaved, remained shackled by poverty, by debt, and by fear. They called it freedom. But for the families bending their backs beneath the sun from dawn until the cicadas cried at dusk, it was the same chain, only forged from different iron. As the day's light waned, dust shimmered in the air, turning the horizon into a copper haze. On the broad wooden porch of the main house stood a girl no older than 9. Her bare feet were darkened and cracked from weeks without shoes. The dying light fell across her small, trembling body as she stared at the ground before her. Her parents lay there in the dirt, their bodies twisted, their blood soaking into the thirsty soil. The metallic tang of it hung in the air, mingling with the smells of sweat and cotton. The girl did not cry. She stood frozen, one hand gripping the frayed hem of her dress, the other curled into a fist so tight her nails broke the skin of her palm. A few steps away, the master and mistress held rifles still warm from the shots. The man's pale face gleamed with sweat, the cords of his neck tight, his icy eyes unable to rest on what had been done. His once white shirt bore dark stains that would never wash clean. Beside him, the mistress clutched her rifle, her polished fingers stiff around the stock, her hair pinned neatly, as though refusing to admit to the chaos surrounding her. Her breaths came sharp and shallow. The moments stretched unbearably. Their bullets had not found the workers who were rumored to be plotting an escape. Instead, in their haste, they had taken the wrong lives. A mistake that could never be undone. The child's one good eye glinted hard in the fading sun. The other, bruised and clouded from an old accident, hung half-closed and raw. That damaged eye was a story of its own, of nights when walls shook with shouting, when fists struck wood, when the air filled with fear. She had learned early that words and apologies meant nothing. They could not bring back her mother's gentle hand on her cheek, nor her father's quiet hum as he worked late into the night to carve out hope for her future. At the edge of the fields, the other workers stood motionless, their faces tight with fear, their rage locked deep. They said nothing. They couldn't. Survival meant silence. Even a whisper of protest could draw a rifle barrel toward them. The mistress was the first to step forward, her voice trembling as she forced the words out. It was a mistake, she said, brittle and rehearsed, as though apology could rinse away the blood soaking the porch. She crouched her shadow, falling across the girl, and whispered, "Come inside. You're safe now. Safe." The word rang empty. Safe had been her mother's laughter in the cabin kitchen, turning scraps into meals and singing old songs to push away the day's weariness. Safe had been her father's arms, lifting her high into the twilight, telling her not to fear the dark. That kind of safety was gone now, buried in the dirt with the only 2 people who had ever loved her. The master cleared his throat, stepping closer. His shadow fell across her small frame, His voice was calm, but beneath it trembled something uneasy. "We'll take care of you now," he said. "You'll stay here. You'll have everything you need." The girl did not move. Her good eye lifted to meet his steady, unblinking. And for the first time that evening, he looked away. Whatever innocence had lived in her gaze was gone. In that instant, something colder had taken root. A quiet, simmering hate that would never leave her. When they finally led her into the house, the night closed around her like a mouth dot. The main house was vast, heavy with silence. Its tall walls were lined with oil portraits, stern ancestors who seemed to glare down at her with lifeless, glassy eyes. Her bare feet touched polished wooden floors that shone like mirrors, each small step echoing through the cavernous rooms. The smell of beeswax and tobacco clung to the air, sharp and suffocating. She hated it instantly. That first night, they scrubbed her skin until it burned as if the dirt and blood could be erased with enough force. They dressed her in a stiff white nightgown, its lace collar brushing against the bruise on her cheek. At the long dining table, candlelight flickered against crystal glass. They set roasted meat and buttered rolls before her, the plates gleaming in the glow. She did not touch them. She sat in silence, her legs dangling above the polished floor, her expression flat and unreadable. Across from her, the mistress kept her eyes down, staring into her untouched wine. The master drowned himself in bourbon, the clinking ice, like the tolling of a slow, deliberate bell. In the days that followed, the house resumed its rhythm with unsettling precision, as though nothing at all had happened. The mistress oversaw lessons, her posture rigid, her words clipped, keeping distance, as though formality could wash away guilt. The master spoke of redemption, of giving the child a better life, of raising her as one of their own. But no matter how they clothed her, no matter where they placed her, they never called her by her name. To them, she was simply the girl. At night, in her small room tucked far from the grand staircase, she sat by the narrow window knees, pulled tight against her chest, whispering her parents' names into the darkness. The wind stirred through the cotton rows outside, carrying the hum of insects and the cry of a lone coyote. She promised her mother and father that she would not forget. She would never forget. By the week's end, even the workers on the ranch had begun to avert their eyes from her. There was something in that one unblinking gaze, sharp, patient, and cold, that unsettled even the bravest among them. The mistress stopped trying to speak to her, her guilt curdling into distant civility. The master, however, kept watching, cautious, uneasy, as if he sensed the storm slowly gathering inside the silent child with one good eye, and so she remained a ghost inside the mansion. Her hands learned the work of the kitchen. Her steps mapped every creaking floorboard, every locked door. She smiled, rarely spoke less, but in the hours when the house slept and the fields lay still, she whispered her vow like a prayer. One day they would feel what she had felt. They would lose what she had lost. And they would learn too late what it meant to be utterly alone. The years passed, but time did not dull her memories. The girl grew into a tall, slender teenager, shaped by endless days of work and sleepless nights, staring at the ceiling of her narrow room. The house had become her cage, dressed in silk and wealth, but still a cage. She moved through its halls with a silent precision that unsettled everyone who crossed her path. From the beginning, They decided she would be useful. The mistress called it an opportunity, as though the word itself could erase the screams still echoing in the girl's mind. She's bright, the mistress would say. Quick hands. A mind like a sponge. And so, she was handed over to the house cook, Laya, an older black woman with rough hands and a sharp tongue who hid her tenderness behind a wall of discipline. Laya taught her everything. How to season iron skillets until they gleamed like obsidian. How to grind spices into dust, their fragrance thick in the air. How to listen to food, the hiss of butter on hot metal, the crackle of bacon fat, the patient simmer of a stew that demanded all day. She learned to pull sweetness from bitterness, to make humble scraps taste rich, and to craft fine dishes that melted into silence on the tongue. By 14, she was already a master. French hollandaise smooth as silk, pasta rolled so thin it seemed like lace, Spanish stews that thickened with time into perfection, southern biscuits so light they seemed to float. Her hands moved with speed and grace. She forgot nothing. She needed no reminders. In the kitchen, she became a shadow, efficient, precise, unseen unless called upon. But her eye never stopped watching. She watched the cooks, the maids, the ranch hands. She watched the master and mistress and the guests who passed through in polished boots and clouds of perfume. Every whisper, every glance she carried, like invisible notes, stored away for a future no one else could imagine. To the family, she became something between servant and trophy, an ornament of their twisted redemption. She's family, the mistress would say over tea, her tone airy rehearsed. We've given her everything. She'll want for nothing as long as she stays with us. But the rules never changed. She could enter the dining room, but not the table. She could prepare the food, but not taste it. She could wear fine fabric, but never forget her place. At night, when cicadas screamed outside and the walls carried the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses, she lay awake in her narrow bed, silent, her one good eye open in the dark, sharp as a blade. By 16, she was the pulse of the kitchen. Laya's hands had slowed with age, and the girl filled every gap left behind. She rose before dawn, kneading bread in grey, morning light, brewing coffee strong enough to stir the dead seasoning meats with a care that silenced even the most critical guests. She moved as if she had been born to it. Every step, sure, every gesture, practiced her body, remembering long after her mind drifted elsewhere. And still, the staff whispered about her when they thought she could not hear. They whispered about her, about the way she moved without sound, about how her single eye seemed to cut through people, stripping them bare until nothing was left but truth. They whispered about the scar tracing pale across her dark cheek, and about how her expression never shifted no matter what words were thrown at her. To them, she was a mystery, an echo at the edges of their vision. And mysteries always unsettle people. At the grand dinners, she glided between the kitchen and the table, refilling glasses, replacing plates, her presence as seamless as the white linen draped across the long wood. She spoke only when spoken to, each movement practiced soundless. Yet sometimes, when no one thought to notice, her gaze lingered. Too long on the master as he laughed among his guests. Too long on the mistress as she adjusted her pearls. Too long on the portraits looming over the table, their painted eyes fixed As if in judgment, the guests felt it, though none dared speak of it. Some shifted in their seats uneasy under the weight of her stare, as though a cold hand pressed against their skin. Others ignored her altogether, lost in the shimmer of their wine. But the servants saw. They saw the tightening of her grip on a tray, the small tremor of restraint, the way her face remained unreadable. And so, the whispers grew. By 17, she had risen beyond servant. The mistress trusted her with menus for every dinner party. The master summoned her when he needed to impress a guest. She held the keys to the pantry, commanded the maids, directed the kitchen hands, and earned the quiet respect of the entire staff. But with respect came unease, the kind that grows in shadows. There was something in her presence no one could name, yet all could feel. It was in her stillness, in the crisp whiteness of her apron, in her hair, pulled back with flawless precision. It was in the way her single good eye never wavered. She did not flinch when the master's voice thundered. She did not soften when the mistress extended small gestures of kindness. Her silence spoke louder than words ever could. Yet in the kitchen, surrounded by the rhythm of fire and steel, she found her sanctuary. The chopping of vegetables, the hiss of meat striking hot iron, the steady patient stirring of sauces that demanded time. This was her language, one she understood more clearly than any human voice. Here she did not need to speak, the kitchen listened for her. In its hum she built walls too high for the world to climb. Still the memories never stayed buried. They came in flashes. Her father's humming voice, her mother's smile, the shattering crack of gunfire, the taste of dirt when her knees struck the ground. She carried all of it, a constant weight pressed into her bones, shaping her into something sharper, something unbreakable. By 18, the frightened child who had once stood barefoot on a blood-soaked porch was gone. In her place stood a young woman, her face an unreadable mask, her one bright eye unflinching. The masters boasted of her as family, called her their pride, their redemption. But in the quiet kitchen, with her hands raw from work and her knife sharpened to perfection, she knew the truth. She was not theirs. She had never been theirs. By her mid-20s, the girl with one eye had become the shadow that held the mansion together. Years of silence and obedience had carved her into the household's spine. No longer confined to the kitchen, she managed the entire estate. Maids, groundskeepers, even the stable boys moved when she gave a single glance. She seemed the perfect servant. Crisp apron, neat hair, soft voice, eyes lowered when praised. To the family, she was proof of their generosity, a living emblem of redemption. But she knew better. They boasted about her to guests, called her our girl, the backbone of the house. In return, she offered only a soft, polite smile, an expression that revealed nothing and promised even less. Beneath that calm exterior, silence had sharpened into steel. The memory of that night clung to her bones like a wound that refused to heal. When the halls echoed with the laughter and music, when glasses clinked and voices rose in warmth, her gaze drifted too long, too steady toward the family portraits. Those painted faces, frozen in smug smiles, looked down on her from the walls, blind to the truth. They never noticed. They never did. By day, she was flawless order. Her hands, sure her voice, even her presence a quiet rhythm that kept the household turning like clockwork. She anticipated needs before they were spoken, commanded the staff with precision, and held the mansion together so seamlessly that the masters marveled without ever truly seeing her. But at night, when the rooms sank into shadow and silence pressed heavy against the walls, the perfect servant became something else. Barefoot candle in hand, she walked the darkened halls. Her fingers brushed the painted frames, the patriarch with eyes like stone, the matriarch with her pearls, the children immortalized in youth. To them she whispered softly words that slipped into the dark, like smoke memories of blood in the dirt, promises forged in grief oaths she intended to keep. In the kitchen, the knives waited. She honed them with slow, deliberate strokes, steel whispering against steel. To others, it looked like diligent devotion to her craft. But to her, it was ritual, a prayer in iron, a reminder that patience was as sharp a weapon as any blade. The staff watched with weary eyes. They spoke of her only in hushed tones, of the way her good eye pierced through you, of how her expression never wavered, no matter the chaos. Some called it blessing, others curse. All agreed on one thing: she was not to be crossed. The family mistook her silence for devotion, her composure for gratitude. They rewarded her with soft fabrics, new shoes, small privileges, a seat at the edge of gatherings, a place in their pride. And she accepted it, all head-bowed lips curved in that polite, empty smile. Every gift, every kindness only tightened the coil of fury beneath her stillness. At times, she stood on the porch, staring into the endless fields. By night, stripped of their false beauty, they stretched raw and dark to the horizon. She remembered her bare feet, running across that dirt, her laughter swallowed by open sky, until gunfire turned joy into silence. Sometimes she thought she heard her parents' voices on the wind, but she never wept. The girl who once trembled had long since vanished. In her place stood a woman forged of calculation, her silence a blade honed by time. Years slid past. She studied the house as though it was scripture. Every creak of the floorboards, every locked door, every rhythm of the family when they dined, when they slept, when they left. She mapped their lives with the patience of someone who had nothing left but time. By her 26th year, unmarked, unnoticed, her transformation was complete. To the world, she was still the perfect servant, humble, loyal, unfaltering. But beneath that mask, her eye gleamed with something cold, precise, inevitable. She had not forgotten. She never would. And so when the first death came, it arrived quietly, folded into an evening like any other. The house bathed in amber light laughter, spilling from the dining hall dot. The eldest son sat at the head of the table, tall and lean, his cruel smile sharpened by the chandelier's glow. He had always been the loudest, the one who barked orders, who took without asking, who believed the house and all within it, including her, were his by right. That night the roast was tender, the vegetables perfectly seasoned, the gravy smooth. She moved silently among them, steady hands, refilling glasses, replacing dishes. Her good eye lingering for a fleeting second as she passed behind his chair. No one noticed. Hours later the house was hushed, laughter gone, lights dimmed, and somewhere above a body struck the floor with a hollow final thud. By the time they found him, His face was pale, his eyes wide, his mouth slack with the shock of a death too swift to understand. They whispered illness, a weak heart, bad luck. The doctor nodded gravely, took his coins and left them to their grief. But she did not falter. Each morning she rose before dawn, lighting fires, kneading bread, tending the house as though nothing had changed. Her hum threaded softly through the halls, steady and calm, a sound that seemed to soothe and unsettle in equal measure. And as their fear grew thicker, heavier with every passing day, she knew with certainty this was only the beginning. Death, she believed, was best served slowly seasoned with patience. The house began to rot. Mirrors vanished, first smothered under black cloth at the mistress's command. Bad omens, she muttered restless spirits. Soon the mansion was draped in shadow, every reflection, silenced every surface a muted warning. Servants crossed themselves when they passed the shrouded glass, whispering their unease. She said nothing. Her good eye caught everything. By the second month, candles burned through the nights. Wax pooled thick on the floors. Smoke clung heavy in the air. The family claimed it kept the darkness away, though even they could not name what hunted them. Shadows twisted against the walls like restless things, and every creak of the boards echoed too loud in the stillness. Then came the weeping. The youngest daughter first waking at night with sobs that played through the corridors. The others dismissed it as grief until they too began to hear the voices. Low murmurs behind the walls, footsteps in empty rooms, laughter that vanished when chased. Fear thickened like fog. Even the boldest servants avoided certain halls after sundown. Illness followed slow and insidious. A fever here, a tremor there. Eyes sunken, hands unsteady. The doctor came, more often spoke of stress of air. Gone bad, but never offered cure. The eldest daughter collapsed one afternoon, her body jerking, froth spilling between her lips as the family screamed. They carried her upstairs, their terror raw, the master's voice breaking as he barked orders no one dared disobey. Through it all, she moved unhindered. Cool cloths, bowls of broth, prayers murmured in a voice that calmed no one, yet steadied the room enough to keep it from splintering. She was everywhere and nowhere. A ghost in an apron. By the fourth month, hallucinations bloomed. The mistress swore her dead son stood watching from the stairwell, pale and silent. She locked herself away, trembling behind her pearls. The youngest child cried of whispers, calling his name from within the walls. Even the master, once iron and unyielding, now startled at shadows, his grip on the house slipping piece by piece. The servants begged to leave. The mistress forbade it. Fear, she said, would follow them beyond these walls. And so, they stayed pale and hollow-eyed, dragging their bodies through the motions of service, whispering prayers they no longer believed in. At night, the house breathed differently. Candlelight writhed across the halls, shadows swelling, collapsing, stretching like restless spirits. The air soured with smoke wax and sickness. Weeping rose and fell like tides. Doors opened and closed without touch. Footsteps stalked the corridors where no one walked, and through it all she moved as if nothing had changed. Her steps measured, her gaze unblinking. Bowls of water, trays of food, cloths pressed to fevered brows. Her voice soft, steady, unchanged. To them she was still the perfect servant, but when their eyes closed, when their bodies writhed and begged for mercy that would never come, she lingered in the doorway, her good eye gleaming. She drank in their suffering steady and patient. She had not forgotten. She never would. And the house, she knew, was only beginning to learn what it meant to remember. They were too consumed by their terror, blind to the shadows that coiled in every corner. And in the kitchen, when the house slept and candles guttered low, she sharpened her knives. The hiss of steel against steel threaded softly through the empty halls, another whisper in a house drowning in them. Her motions were slow, exacting. Steel against stone, scrape after scrape, steady as a heartbeat. By the 6th month, the mansion was unrecognizable. Gardens strangled by weeds, dust thick in corners, smoke and rot stitched into the air. The family withered in their rooms, muttering of curses and sins come to collect their due. She listened, silent, her good eye sharp. There were no curses, no ghosts, only her, and the promise she had made long ago that they would suffer and they would end slowly until nothing remained but silence. The silence came. Heavy, suffocating a silence that even breath seemed to disturb. The patriarch, once a man who believed himself eternal, lay swallowed by his sheets, reduced to parchment skin and restless eyes that hunted for escape where none existed. Fear clung to him like a second skin. The door opened without sound. Her steps whispered across the floor. She appeared in the dim light apron. Neat hair bound every line of her composed. A tray balanced in her hands, a bowl of broth. Steam curled upward, fragrant, warm, almost kind. She crossed the room in even steps, placed the tray by his bed, then sat, posture straight, hands folded, gaze unwavering. Neither spoke, only the wind against the cracked panes. Only his shallow breath. His lips trembled with words he could not shape, but he knew. Fever could not veil it. He knew. She lifted the bowl spoon in hand, her movements tender, deliberate. He drank. The broth slid down his throat, rich and deceptive as forgiveness. Her good eye held his, bright in the candlelight, sharp as glass. When he dared to look at her, he saw it finality, ownership, the truth that whatever remained of him belonged to her now. I told you, she said, soft as prayer, delicate as a secret. I never forget. The candle quivered. The shadows leaned closer. His breath rasped broken, and he saw them, the faces of the dead crowding the room in silence. His son, his daughter, the family he had already buried. They watched, accusing, waiting. She did not move, did not offer comfort. She only waited, patient, until the bowl slipped from his trembling hands, clattering against the floor. Leaning forward, her shadow draping across his ruined face, she whispered again, almost tender, I told you. His lips shaped her name, but no sound came. His chest hitched once, then stilled. The candle flame danced, then steadied. The silence pressed down, absolute, unbroken. She sat with him a long while, her shadow etched long and thin against the wall. No triumph, no rush. Vengeance was never haste. It was patience fulfilled. At last, she stood. With care, she drew the sheet over his face as though sealing a tomb. The air smelled of broth wax inevitability. At the doorway, she paused, hand resting on the frame, her gaze sweeping the room one last time. Then she left her steps, even her silence intact. The kitchen waited. Knives gleamed softly. The smell of stock lingered. She cleaned the bowl until it shone, set it back in its place. Ritual completed. Outside, the night air was cool. The moon hung heavy above the fields, pale light draping the earth. She stood still, her good eye on the horizon. Not searching, not waiting, simply remembering Dot. The wind moved through the tall grass, carrying the dry scent of earth and old memory. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her. Behind her, the house loomed in darkness, its windows hollow, its walls heavy with everything they had held and everything they had lost. Within its bones lingered the last shallow breath of the man who had built it, woven now into the wood and stone. And she, the girl who had once been small and broken, stood alone. Her silence was no longer a wound, but a crown. The ranch had fallen quiet. A silence not of peace, but of reckoning, the kind that settles into the bones of land too long starved for justice. The family was gone, every last one of them. Their kingdom buried in dry Texas soil, their voices scattered into whispers that the wind carried away. The papers had been signed. The land, the wealth, the house, they were hers now. The lawyers had bowed their heads, their careful words dissolving into silence before her gaze. She spoke little, only enough to mark the signatures in the sharp script she had taught herself by candlelight. When all was done, she walked the grand halls alone. Portraits still lined the walls. Their painted eyes followed her with the arrogance of memory. She stopped before each one, silent, the weight of her gaze heavier than any curse. Then she turned slow and deliberate and left them staring into an emptiness that would never answer back. The servants whispered prayers behind lowered eyes. They crossed themselves as she passed. Cursed, they said. Haunted. Touched by something that did not belong to the living. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps they were too afraid to see the truth. One by one she dismissed them, her voice calm, her words final. Some fled quickly, clutching their bags as though chased. Others lingered pale and trembling, whispering prayers to saints who would not answer. She watched them go, and when the last door closed, she turned the key herself. The echo of the lock rang through the empty rooms, sealing the silence in. Now the house belonged only to her. At night, she lit the long dining hall with candles, the white tapers dripping wax down polished silver. She sat at the head of the table where she had once stood, silent, unseen, and watched the rows of empty chairs. The knives gleamed sharp on the sideboard. Her reflection fractured and multiplied in the sheen of the silver. Sometimes she poured the old wine, the master's favorite, and let its bitterness stain her tongue. Sometimes she whispered into the stillness, not prayers, not regrets, just acknowledgement. A ritual of presence, a reminder that she remained and they did not. By day she walked the fields. At dawn her figure rose against the horizon, still as a monument, her good eye gleaming in the light of a new sun. From the distant road, the workers looked toward the house and muttered. None dared draw closer. The days folded into years. The house breathed with her a living tomb, its silence both her companion and her crown. And when the wind rose across the plains, rattling the old windows and carrying voices that were not there, those who heard it said it was the dead refusing to rest. But she knew better. The ghosts belonged to her Dot. There were no voices anymore, no footsteps, no laughter in the halls. The house was hers. The land was hers. The silence was hers. The family that had ruled over her was gone. Their power dissolved into dust and memory. She had taken it all until only the quiet remained. Years passed and the ranch grew vast beneath her hand. Fields stretched beyond sight, cattle multiplied, wealth accumulated. Yet, she never sought praise, never courted company. Townsfolk lowered their eyes when she rode through the streets calling her the quiet queen. She accepted the name without a word. Out inside the house, nothing changed. The portraits still stared from the walls. The silver gleamed untouched. The rooms were spotless as shrines. At night, when the wind swept through the plains, she sometimes heard them, the hum of her mother. Her father's laugh voices carried in the rattling shutters. She never answered. She only listened. Every year on the night, the sky bruised dark, she walked to the graves on the hill. No prayers, no forgiveness. Only presence, a promise kept. The years hardened into legend. Men spoke of her with reverence and unease. Some swore she was blessed, others that she was cursed. Children whispered that the house itself breathed with her silence. And when the wind rose, carrying dust and the taste of blood across the plains, travelers told of a figure on the porch, scarred face, catching the dying light, a glass raised in a solitary toast. Her good eye gleamed like a blade in the dusk, sharp, cold, eternal. The land remembered her, and it always would.